I'm Bree Luck, and you are listening to the Pause to Go podcast, where we explore the process of turning life's transitions into stellar transformations. You can expect interviews with experts, straight talk with remarkable humans, and conversations about making the most of every phase of life. Because when we approach life's stickiest spots with curiosity, support, and a little bit of inspiration, anything is possible. So whether you're on your way to work or settling in with your favorite beverage, together we can pause to go. As a solopreneur, I really like the flexibility to work from pretty much anywhere, so I'm happy to head down to Code-Based Co-working, where I can enjoy the company of others while I tackle my to-do list. Also, they have a state-of-the-art, consumer-friendly podcasting studio that is frankly my home away from home. So head over to Code-Based Co-working, check it out, and when you do, tell them that Bree sent you. Sometimes you have a conversation with someone that is truly life-changing. And maybe in the moment you think, oh, that was a great chat. I really liked sharing brain and heart space with that person. And then a week or a month or a couple of months or maybe even a year down the line, you look at the changes that you've made in your day-to-day, and maybe the changes are tiny, but they add up to have an exponential effect on the transformation of your life. And when you think about it, when you really pause to think about it, you can trace it back to that one interaction. Yeah, so that's what this conversation with Jessica Childs did for me. So it's been especially meaningful to put this episode together for you because I get to experience our beautiful chat about perimenopause and Lyme disease, our chat about really leaning into an embodied state as we explore our relationships to ourselves and to others, and the importance of presence in making deep and meaningful conversations. So Jess is a Somatica certified intimacy coach who brings a gorgeous vulnerability to this conversation. Listen to this episode and then share it with a friend. I mean, I want you to share this episode specifically with a friend, but also maybe just be aware of how what Jess has to say can transform your days in tiny and monumental ways as you show up with vulnerability and presence in all that you do. Enjoy the episode. I'm so happy to be here with you today. It's like my heart is just so full. It's really lovely. And where are you right now? Are you in Brooklyn?
No, we moved to upstate New York in Woodstock, the land of, beautiful trees, lots and lots of water, forest water, and, art, music, hippies. It's lovely up here.
It's so beautiful up there. My daughter is at school at Vassar, so she's in Poughkeepsie.
Right down the street.
Right down the street.
I went to Bard, which is right down the street from Vassar. It's a great place to be in college, right down the street from the city. And yeah, good for her.
It is. Bard is so great too. They actually have a prison program that I really love. I did a lot of work in prisons for a while. We are talking about perimenopause and menopause. Mm. And I would love to begin by talking a little bit about your story. So can you tell us how old you are and where you are in relation to this part of your life?
Yeah, yes, I can. So I am currently 44. I'll be 45 in December. I believe when I look back that my perimenopause symptoms probably started in my 20s, actually. Very, very, very minor, very slowly. And in my late 30s, 38 is when I started experiencing differences in cycle length. And I thought that it was stress related. I didn't really, put two and two together that there were hormonal shifts that often begin in people's 30s. When I said it started in my 20s, what I really mean is that hormones have been in flux for all of my all of my life probably, but really since I started my cycles in my early teens, hormones have kind of pushed and pulled in different ways in my life. So kind of unraveling the start of perimenopause is an interesting kind of time point. But I will say that this latest shift began in my late 30s. And like I said, it was the shortening and lengthening of cycles occasionally. So I remember the first time it happened, it was like a 15-day cycle. And I was so angry because I was on vacation. I literally packed my bags, got an airplane, and I was like, I will not have a period because it's, I just had a period 2 weeks ago. And boom, on the freaking on the flight, my period. I'm like, what is happening here? I've got 2 children in tow going to the Caribbean. And I was like, I felt very disappointed, but I thought that it was stress related. And I started noticing that every time I traveled, I had a period. I was like, okay, well, this is strange. Like, it's like my cycles started orienting around my travel schedule. So yeah, that was sort of a time point that I could, cite as the beginning of this part of the transition.
That whole inconvenience of having a period, and then the inconvenience of other signposts that come up that just show they're just part of our humanity, just part of being human. For me, it sometimes feels like more than inconvenience. It feels like betrayal. It's like, no, you're just supposed to be 5 days long, you little period. And I count on you. And now what is this that you're throwing at me? It's so interesting. And so where are you now?
So now, 6 years later, a whole lot of other things have happened. When I was 40, I came down with this headache that was different than any headache I had ever had before. It was a little bit, it felt grindy, not just pain, but like it felt had a different quality. It felt like sandpaper in my head. And I had, regular headaches here and there throughout my life. And Advil always just knocked them out. But this headache would go nowhere no matter what I threw at it. And that was sort of the beginning of kind of a major upheaval. I started having what I would call micro voids, where I would kind of come to milliseconds later. That makes sense. Like little gaps in time started happening.
Yeah.
In my awareness. And it was terrifying. I have to be honest, it was absolutely terrifying. And I started seeing doctors. And by the way, nobody ever mentioned that I was in the age range where shifts started happening. What I did discover, though, is that I had the antibodies to Lyme disease, Lyme bacteria, Borrelia bacteria. I had antibodies to it in my body. And so my medical people treated it like Lyme disease. And so I started down that path and things got really wacky, just really wacky. It was about 2 years of deep experience of depression, fatigue, vertigo, sleeplessness, restlessness, elevated heart rate, and these headaches that were just out of control. I couldn't walk more than, half a block without my head feeling like it was going to explode. And like I said, there was no medication that I was willing to try. I'll say that, I wasn't really willing to take opiates. No medication would touch it. And so I really at that point thought that I only had Lyme disease and it was devastating me. I want to fast forward really quick because I don't want to get stuck there, because I want to elucidate what happened after those 2 years. There was a moment when I was in the Caribbean again. I was laying in the water and my hands felt like they were swollen and I had so much pain in my body. And this is after years of treatment. Okay. I had done everything imaginable to treat the Lyme disease. I'm laying there and I said, I can't do, there's nothing else available to me to treat this. I'm going to have to do the best I can with what I have, which is a lot of pain, a lot of inability, a lot of, disconnection from people and my body because of the pain and, the neurological conditions. And that moment, really changed things for me. And in the 2 years that have passed since then, or 3 years almost now that have passed since then, it has become really unclear what of that was Lyme and what of that was the onslaught of perimenopause, and
so sure.
and what my personal orientation to all of that had, contributed to the complex, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah.
I
Yeah.
understand that. So, as you know, I also have a history with Lyme disease at the same age, at 40, diagnosed similar
Crazy.
types of symptoms.
It's crazy.
And I'm only now. So, and I've been symptom free. I'm 48 now. I've been symptom free since I was about, let's see, 42, 43, since I was 43. and and now I'm looking back on it and I'm thinking, was it just Lyme or was it the beginning of perimenopause? And that because I haven't really known what to look for, and there's so much of a stigma, ageism. It's really ageism. It's the loss of fertility. It's the loss of youth. Like it's all this loss, right? Loss. And similarly, my doctor, I had excellent medical care. They threw everything at me that they could. But my doctor also never said this could be related to some hormonal fluctuations that are happening. This could be related to perimenopause. So it is fascinating. And I love that you're bringing this up because I think that it's really useful for women. And you and I in our sort of pre-talk, you also said that you've noticed it not just with women, but with all humans, right?
That's right.
That there are some shifts that are happening. And I think that it's just important for us to know, hey, if something's coming up and it feels really weird and your doctor doesn't bring up your age or this part of your life or perimenopause, if you have or have had ovaries, it's a good idea to just ask, right?
Absolutely. To bring it into the conversation. And interestingly enough, I don't know how much training doctors actually get in the experience that people may have during perimenopause. Like, I feel like when I have asked my medical relationships to, kind of help me investigate what's going on for me hormonally, I get a lot of, well, we don't really know. There's no real test for it. We just kind of say, well, what symptoms do you have? Well, it sounds like it could be. And that's sort of the extent of the content or the organization of it that I can get from my doctors. Now, that being said, I also haven't sought out, deeper and deeper layers of medical practitioners who may have more thought and more awareness around this. So there's that. But I'm part of lots of perimenopause boards now on social media, just trying to, unravel my own story a little bit. And it seems like that's a pretty common occurrence, is that, there's a lot of great knowledge and, skills in the medical community. So I in no way want to downplay that, but in women's health and women's reproductive health, there is just a paucity of research and understanding. There really is.
Well, and that's why we're here, right? Is to raise awareness so that we also know what to ask for as consumers too, that we want our medical care providers to have a greater understanding of what our bodies are going through.
Bree, I just want to take a moment to just sincerely appreciate you having put this together. If I wish that I had something like this before these whole years started, so that it wasn't such a shock. And it took me years to reorient to my new body. I mean, we're all socialized to think of our bodies as machines that carry us around, right? And perimenopause for me has been a great awakening back into my own body with curiosity and trust that was just not there before.
That's the great gift of this of this transition, right?
Mm-hmm.
Is that
Absolutely.
it calls us to be curious about our bodies. It calls us to be curious about how society sees this part of our lives, how we are seen and how we act as our bodies and minds and cultures are shifting. And
So true.
I know that there's a lot that's hard. There's a lot that's hard about transitions, right? They're just hard. They're stressful. They are inherently stressful. But they are also an opportunity to go back to that child's mind, that curiosity, right? And look at the situation anew. All right, let's keep going though. We have a lot to talk about.
Get a cup of tea, light a fire in the fire pit.
That's right. It's going to be the 3-hour chat with Jess and Bree. So there you are. You're back in the Caribbean again. You have this aha moment. Then what happens?
Well, for me, I had a layer to my life since I was a teen of kind of activated body state, I'll say, known as anxiety, depression, right? It was only at times debilitating. It like during critical moments in my life, it became a little bit like too much for me to bear. But in general, I would call it like a thin crust. It wasn't enough to stop me from living my life, but it was definitely enough to color it differently than I wished it would be. So just noticing that I had this awareness of myself and perhaps a way that I could approach trying to live my best life in the face of pain and, neurological confusion and disease and chronic illness. I had this awareness that there might be some room for me to expand into that would create more relief for me. And that was in looking at how my emotions were playing out in my body. I had done the bootstrapping thing, meaning like today I wake up and I'm not going to be sad today. Today I wake up and I'm not going to be anxious today. I'd done that my whole life. And when I found myself kind of flattened with fatigue and the complex of body issues I was having at that time, I didn't really have the energy to bootstrap anymore. All I could really do was just kind of lay there and be like, oh, that sucks, And there's something about just laying there and being like, oh, that sucks to feel that way, that actually created like an opportunity to learn about myself instead of trying to push it away, instead of trying to like push it back and bury it down and get on with it and ignore it and pretend like it didn't exist and just like buck up. Something about being really deeply exhausted allowed me to, I guess, just like be like, oh, this is the shitty feeling that I have right now. And I'm not going to do anything to like try to stop it because I really can't. and I started noticing a lot of really phenomenal things about the way that my body felt to me, the way that I felt to me. Like I noticed that when I felt good, for instance, my eyes were really open and allowing in the quality of the light. I know that sounds very specific and very personal, and it is. That's me. That's how my body feels good, is when my senses are open, right? And noticing that when I feel really crappy, my senses are really shut down and I'm like thinking a lot of thoughts.
Well, you're not receiving then.
I'm not embodied.
Oh,
Right? I'm just like,
yeah.
I've got my protective mechanisms on. I'm trying to batten down the hatches. And there's a distinctive difference in my body between when I'm in a state of feeling good and a state of feeling bad. So that was like a big first step in me starting to unravel this whole thing. And I noticed that I could actually find myself in a grindy place of pain and suffering And if I just attuned to my environment and started letting the light in to my eyes and hearing the sounds, it gave me 10% more of myself,
10% more is a lot.
That's a lot. So, and now, Bree, now the symptoms that I have. So this is a perfect time to have this conversation because I have been on a cycle that was about 45 days, a longer cycle between periods. And my period just started yesterday. Okay. And last night I woke up at 3:30 in the morning and I couldn't go back to sleep again. Right. I've had this like migraine helmet, like just kind of waiting there in the sidelines to come in and noticing how, at the beginning of this process, those things were enough to make me just like, oh, why is this happening? I need sleep. I have small children. I have to work. I have all these things to do. I have to sleep. And I tell you what, at 3:30 in the morning last night when I was awake, I was like, oh yeah, this is normal for me. I'm having my period and my hormones are a little bit different now, and I just relate to it more than try to fight it. And it brings me a sense of like, oh, this is my body and I know it and I can trust it. It knows what it's doing. It knows. And there's no battle to be fought here. There's no judgment to be made on it. It's just the way that my body handles a shifting hormone tide. And that's cool. I got this. I read a book. I, tiptoed around the house.
You softened around it.
I softened around it. Yeah.
The next time I wake up in the middle of the night, I will work very hard to remind myself to soften around that. It's a great lesson.
Totally. And that's what I think that's the real medicine in these transitions is it brings us back to our embodied selfness. It's an opportunity. It's available to you to not fight yourself and just be a human and be like, this is what it is to be human. Yes, I'm going to be tired tomorrow and I may not perform like the machine of work that the society values, right? But I can have a good experience of life as a human being, regardless of what I think I should be doing. It's great to be awake in the middle of the night. Are you kidding me? The world is quiet and the moon is shining and how lucky,
Oh, I love that reframe.
Can I share one more quick thing about insomnia and perimenopause?
And please.
This is very personal and this kind of ties into the work that I do. When I first had bad insomnia, it was part of the Lyme complex and it was weird. It was wacky and weird. And so I became a little bit traumatized around sleep, meaning that like I really would be kind of scared to go to bed at night because I was anticipating a really hard night of waking up, going to sleep, waking up, going to sleep, feeling like I'm dropping all of these strange, things that were happening in sleep. And when I started taking my disease back into my own hands after that float in the Caribbean, when I realized it was kind of all on me, I decided one night that I was going to pair this terrible experience with something pleasurable. So I started masturbating every time I woke up in the middle of the night to overcome the fight or flight response that waking up was generally paired with. There, I said it.
Well, and I'm so glad that you did. I've also heard, and I'm hosting this podcast because I want to learn everything about perimenopause and menopause, which also means that I'm starting with knowing very little. Are there chemical releases that happen with sexual intercourse or with masturbation?
Yeah. My perspective on sexuality has grown. So I'm an intimacy coach. That's my day job. I talk about sex. I talk about relationships all day. And my perspective is kind of, it's got many facets, but speaking to what you're specifically asking about the kind of the body state of being in your erotic self, I actually think of the erotic self as the socially alive self, the self that is open and comfortable in relation to yourself and others. That includes a lot of embodiment. Sex in and of itself, I mean, all like physical touch and physical pleasure is an embodied experience, right? So like sleep is an embodied experience. You don't think your way to sleep. You literally allow your body to just be a body and fall asleep. So for me, the way that I kind of relate to what you're saying about the chemical shift in sexuality is kind of like, you know, when you bring your senses, your touch senses online, it is an embodiment exercise. And when you are embodied, your body can do its job of sleeping and other things too, you know?
Yes. Yes. I love that we have moved right into masturbation and sexuality and intimacy and embodiment. I think, yes, I'm so glad that you're here. So I am thrilled because I have heard of intimacy coaches. Intimacy coaches come up a lot on my Instagram feed, which is really, I'm wondering why. I'm just curious around that. And now I have you here. Can you tell me what you do as an intimacy coach? What does it mean and what does it look like for you?
You know, every time I get asked this question, I come up with a different answer. So let's see what I come up with today. So as an intimacy coach, I am supporting people in having the kind of relationships and sex that feels the most joyful, easeful, and pleasurable to them. We are socialized with all of these messages around relationships of all kinds, right? I'm maybe not just talking about intimate relationships. I mean, relating to people in general, and especially around relationships, you know, romantic partnerships or sexual partnerships, intimate partnerships. There's a lot of messaging that comes from our socialization. And when you pare it back, there is a real deep and beautiful human experience of being relational, being social, being sexual that is available to us in our own, you know, as part of our own unique experience and storyline, right? Our own unique arousal that unfortunately we come to adulthood really having so much information about what sex and relationships should look like that when we actually have one in our laps, it's very problematic because it's a very different thing to actually be in deep partnership with somebody than culture has taught us it is. So I help people relate to one another beautifully and wonderfully in intimacy and in sexuality and in relationship. Yes, that's what I do. And my particular take on it, my flavor is very experiential and embodied. So I have a real belief in what has come to be known as our, you know, our nervous system. Like it's kind of a buzz situation right now, but it's really just like the embodied experience of being together. So for instance, I endeavor to create experiences for people to practice what it feels like to be in authentic connection with others, and then take that out into the world and connect authentically with people around them. That applies to, you know, the way that we manage our trigger systems, you know, when our emotions come up, to repair conversations around, you know, having rupture and connection. And also like what comes up for us when people approach us physically and want to interact with us sexually. Like, do we know what we want to feel and do and experience in that interaction? And how do we communicate that? How do we negotiate what we really want? What we really want, not what the romance movies show us. Who is that? Tom Cruise. And think about Top Gun. From my childhood, there's this like Top Gun sexual scene that like the iconic socialized sex scene of like the man, you know, pushing a woman up against a wall and like kissing and kissing and kissing. And that's cool. That's great. But it's not all that's on the menu, you know?
Yes. So am I right then in hearing that you are asking your clients to imagine the feeling of those types of authentic, pleasurable, intimate experiences and relationships, that you're asking them to imagine it so that it can be real? Is that what it is?
That's such a good question. So I actually endeavor to create an authentic connection with clients where we are actually experiencing in real time what it feels like to be open to each other. So this is available. There's a lot of boundaries that come into it, right? People always ask, are you a sexological body worker, which is a different field, or are you a sex worker? That's a different field. What I am doing is I am exploring the kind of the internal states of what it feels like to be together. And then so that can look like touch sometimes. So like I create experiences where a good example is recognizing what a boundary feels like in your body. Okay, so people are talking all about boundaries now, and they talk about it. They're talking about it and feeling it are two different things. When you actually go there and feel it on purpose, then you can catalog and know, oh, my body does this when it's uncomfortable, when it wants to pull back, or when something is happening that feels boundary crossing. This is what it feels like. So I create the experience where I try to find people's boundaries, right? Sometimes that looks like, me sitting down next to somebody with our legs touching, right? Ooh, that feels a little bit too much. That's too much touch for somebody I'm not, involved with, right? Or somebody that, or maybe I'm working with somebody who doesn't have a sexual orientation toward a female, right? And so I'm sitting down, I'm like, maybe I put my hand on their leg. Ooh, what does that feel like? Does that feel okay? Or is that something that that's bringing up something in your body that's saying, I'm uncomfortable? So noticing what feels like escalation that is wanted and what feels like, oh, that's a boundary that I need to uphold, right? I maybe I'm moving quickly, but
no, it's great. I'm thinking about how earlier you mentioned feeling the light come in your eyes, and how if you could put yourself in that state again, it would bring you into an open, embodied state and out of the clouded head, lost in thought. That's not exactly what you said, but that kind of feeling state. And that this isn't all that different from that.
Yes, I love that you said that. You're asking me such beautiful questions, Bree. I'm so enjoying this. I love that you brought that up, because boundaries are a lot like capacities, right? A boundary is evidenced by an internal state shift. Now, there are times, and you know this as a mother, where your boundaries are crossed and you are allowing it to happen, right?
Yes.
It's like your kids are coming in and waking you up. I feel aggravated and I'm allowing it to happen because they're my children and I'm letting my boundaries be crossed right now. So how this relates to the internal state is that when you are aware that your internal state is driving, okay, when you're aware that your internal state is shifting, okay, when you become aware of it, you then become choiceful about it, okay? So I'm not saying that every time you feel a shift in your body and your boundaries may be being touched, it is absolutely necessary that you defend them, right? Yes. Children are a great example. But being aware that they're happening gives you choicefulness over how you respond. Yeah. So like, oh, there's my boundary. I'm either going to, react from my boundary being crossed, which is that internal state shift, and push somebody away, right? Like, why'd you cross my boundary? Why'd you touch my breast before I wanted you to? Right? Or, oh, I just felt that's making me uncomfortable. Can we slow things down a little bit? Can you try touching my leg instead?
Yes.
Right.
Yes.
So being aware of these shifts, and I will say that just to bring wholeness to the topic, there are some people who orient to boundary crossing in an arousal way, right? So some people will recognize boundary crossing as arousing. So I don't want to bring any shame to that either. That's a whole nother topic. And it's a beautiful world of healing in the nervous system, right? But that's a different topic.
You said something earlier that this also seems to relate to and perhaps offers a reframe that takes shame out of the picture too, which is that a boundary can be a protective element, right? Something that holds what needs to be on the outside. Hold what needs to be kept away. Mm-hmm. But a boundary is also a container, and that we have capacity within that container that it also defines all that we can hold, right?
Yes.
And,
oh my gosh.
And so looking at it from both perspectives, for some people to find arousal when a boundary is crossed may also have something to do with capacity.
Oh my gosh.
I don't know.
Yes, you're 100% on the right track there. Boundaries are not fixed states. They're not. There are moments when, my capacity for my partner to come up and just give me a hug out of the blue is there. And other times it is really jarring for me. And I don't have the capacity for that, right? It's my boundary is much further out at times. As partners, we, can get a little bit of awareness around what, attunement to where our partners are at, or where our lovers, or where our friends, or where our family, or whoever is at with their capacity in the moment. Totally true. And I want to just say that, for me at 44 years old, almost 45, perimenopausal, I am living a better life than I've ever lived. And it's because of the kind of onslaught of shifts that forced me to pay attention to who I actually am. This is all very related to my experience of perimenopause. I have the best sex life I've ever had. And I'm an aging woman. It's beautiful. And I don't anticipate, there is this cultural message. I felt it too. The message of like, oh, I'm getting fatigued and my body's not holding weight like a spry youngster,
Mm-hmm.
And gosh, I love my animal body. It's powerful and passionate, and it's changing and it's dynamic, and I can bring it in a way that I never could before I went through this, this kind of deep dive into how do I do me? How have I been doing me? And how can I do me better?
How can I do me better? I think that may be my mantra for this week. How can I do me better? Seriously.
Yeah.
Seriously. And because I do think that we hear a lot about women who are in perimenopause and menopause who say that their sex drive completely drops, that they have no sex drive. I also have friends who are in their 70s and 80s who say that they have a fantastic sex drive now that they didn't have when they were in their 40s. So I am just curious, what does that look like for you as a practitioner? Are you seeing those kinds of situations with people who are going through perimenopause and menopause? And are they asking that question, how can I do me better?
Yay. I am seeing that with clients. I guess my perspective, and I don't assume that my perspective is anybody else's. And there's also absolutely no rule in the book that says that in order to have a good life, you have to be sexually active. That's just not a rule. It's not a thing. You can really be choiceful. You can make your own choices about whether or not you want to have sex a lot or infrequently or whatever. There's no rule that says that you have to be, active sexually in order to have a great life. So that being said, I do feel like I see that with our socialization and our lack of true knowledge of what is on the menu for us sexually, I think that when the hormones of like fertility, I don't know if you can, but I've always been able to tell in the days around my ovulation, I just get extra turned on. Like, I'm like, ooh, that's a good idea. Let's go do that, and in a way that's not really like just an endless fountain of arousal in my body for the rest of the month. I really get turned on around my ovulation. So when you have the hormonal profile that's kind of driving these spikes in arousal, that can kind of overcome some of the factors in your actual sex life that maybe aren't, hitting the mark of what you really want from sex. Okay. Mm-hmm. And so there's also, just to kind of bring this into the picture, in the beginning of a relationship, there's also the release of a lot of hormones, due to lack of familiarity and questioning your social standing with the person that you're a partner, you're intimate with. So there's this, huge hormonal arc that happens in the beginning of a relationship that causes sex to be easy and free flowing and fun and lots of it, right? And mm-hmm. after that arc has completed, then you're left with two individual people or three or, whoever you're intimate mm-hmm. with, right? I don't mean to think about it in terms of just monogamy, whoever you're intimate with. So that hormonal profile is kind of died back down. And now you're individuals and you're like, okay, if you don't know what it is that you really want from sex and your partner doesn't either, then chances are you're going to start having sex that isn't quite hitting those needs. It's rare that two people just automatically come in and have 70 or 80% alignment in the way that they see sex playing out or the way that they want sex to play out. And the thing is, we don't really even know this because our cultural messaging is telling us that, if we love each other, then we're going to have lots of sex. There'll be lots of attraction and all this stuff, which is just like, it's fun to role play that, but it's not reality. That's not the reality of being in a human body. Human bodies have, long histories of experience and socialization and culturing and all these things and experience and wounding, right? And things that we seek. And if we aren't even aware of that ourselves, how can we share that with our partner? How can we negotiate how to bring out the most amazing feelings in each other during sex, right? Unless we even know that it's possible. So I find that a lot of people in this age, to bring it all full circle, have gone through the arc of, big hormones at the beginning of a relationship. Maybe they've had, children even, and they are, struggling with stress and pressure around work and child raising and all this stuff. And they've got this sex life that is not really fulfilling for either one of them, right? And so you have that, and a lot of women start thinking, oh, I must not be sexual because I don't want sex, right? I must be in that part of my life where, right?
Yes. And especially if that's coupled with social invisibility, mm-hmm. so that you're getting it from the inside and a social reinforcement of that. Yes. I'm with you.
Yes. So yes, I love that you brought that in too. There's also just the social messaging that women, when their bodies start changing and their priorities are changing too a little bit, that, we're not portrayed in the media as these hot, embodied animal women who want to get laid. We don't see it in our culture. Why would we, without really contemplating it, how do we create that space for ourselves, So that's a great question. And I love it. And, like I said, I'm in the middle of perimenopause, having the best sex of my life. And I also can feel that it's different than it was when I was younger. It's not as driven by, what is it? I don't know. I think I need to think on that more, but it's got different character now. Lovely character.
You spoke earlier about the lack of representation of women who are perimenopausal, menopausal, and postmenopausal as sexy, sexual creatures. And so having you say that in the middle of perimenopause, you are having the best sex of your life can also be expansive to us all. It certainly is to me. I'm hearing you and I'm like, okay, Jess, tell me.
How do I do this?
How do I do this?
I want everybody to have this experience. It is truly, it is the juice of life. If there is a flow state and being an open, erotic being in your body, to think of the world as pleasurable and joyful and available to you there is no greater gift. Perimenopause is a fantastic time to really unpack the sexual, intimate, relational parts of your life. You've been through all the learning and all the early experiencing. You know in your body what works for you and what doesn't. The question is, are you like tapping into that, paying attention to it? Are you honoring that? Are you curious about that? Is that part of your like relevant awareness? And if it is, then hell yeah, you're like, you're kind of thriving then.
So not everyone can work with an intimacy coach. Mm-hmm. And we don't want to just go to strangers and sit real close to see what our boundaries are. But I will provide your contact information in the show notes for this conversation. And I hope that people who feel that they could use some help in this area will consider reaching out to an intimacy coach like you. It sounds like so many things. It's something you can't just learn from a book, right? It is about having real embodied practice and relationship. But that said, do you have any suggestions for people who just want to have a little more curiosity or connection with themselves as intimate and sexual and relational creatures?
Yeah, I think that creating space for, we centered on that word earlier, curiosity, creating space for curiosity around things that are happening in your body, especially during these transitions, and not seeking to, judge them, and noticing when you do, noticing the kind of judgments that you're putting on your own experience of this transition, of the symptoms that come up. And, I really feel like everybody should rush to the computer right now and Google perimenopause and menopausal symptoms so that you have a good run. I mean, it's a very long list, right? And if you can kind of keep in mind that's a normal thing for this body to be going through, and create the space for it to happen, and be curious about how you can interface with it in a way that feels like trusting and loving of yourself and this whole human experience. I think that's probably, the foundational first step in not only surviving this transition, this perimenopause hell, people call it, but actually thriving in it, being like, oh, wait, there's a lot here. There's a lot of value, and like, there's a gift to this.
A lot of people who are going through perimenopause do have insomnia. And I think that your suggestion for masturbation is a really great suggestion.
The house is quiet. You're all alone. It's the middle of it. Like, what else is there to do? It's a beautiful thing. It wakens up your body and brings your body online. I love it. Thank you for bringing that back up again. I think it's a really useful tool, actually, for managing a lot of uncomfortable things in life, just to flip it and own it as something that's pleasurable. Like, there's actually a book, Existential Kink. It's sort of a kink. You know what I'm talking about?
Yes. I'm going to put it in the show notes.
It just talks about taking these experiences of things that we judge as uncomfortable or unpleasurable, and just like kind of reveling in them and be like, oh, this is such an exquisite insomnia that I have right now. Ooh, it's delicious. I don't mean like making it only positive. I mean, like, really taking in the hardness of it and the kind of pain of it, and be like, ooh. And then if you add masturbation to it, then you're leveling up in your existential kink.
I love that so much. The Gen X teenager in me just lit up like nobody's business. Yes. So existential kink. Let's savor our insomnia.
Yes.
So I feel like that we've covered a lot right now, and I want to give you space. If there's something else that you have in your notes, so that you, as you were up in the middle of the night thinking about talking, something else that you wanted to say, now's a good time.
Since you asked that question of like, is there something that I wanted to say? So this is going to be like, I'm going to respond to that by sharing a deep insight into one of my great realizations during this time of my life, is that when I think too much about what I'm going to do and say with people, it takes me out of my experience of being with people. And so for me, I have become what I consider kind of a circular leader or circular teacher or circular supporter, in that I really respond from an embodied state to what's happening. And if I don't hit all the marks, then that's okay. It's okay that it's more important to me that I show up and connect with you, for instance, Bree, in this conversation, really feel what I'm feeling and share share vulnerably what my body and thoughts are kind of generating in this context. And all my life, I have judged that and felt like I showed up to things unprepared because I guess I was socialized to think that was of greater value than being present, So
Yes.
that's just what came up for me when you asked me that question. Is there anything else? I certainly did at 3:30 in the morning, be like, I'm going to have this conversation with Bree in the morning. I wonder what I should talk about. But I also let go of all of that just to be here with you. And I do recognize I'm in a niche that allows for that. If I was a mathematician or I was still in neuroscience and I was giving a presentation, I would need to have more ducks in a row. But
Sure, but in dealing with real life human interactions, you are absolutely right. There is nothing greater that you can bring to any conversation, to any interaction, to any connection than presence.
Beautifully said. Beautifully said.
So thank you for being present with me today. I'm so grateful for you and for all that you are doing for your clients, and I think for the world.
I agree. I actually totally agree. I think that if everybody were like relationally and intimately and sexually literate with themselves, we would not have the problems that we have currently in our, in our political climate, in our international, relations, all of these things. I think that deep self-awareness is actually the key to solving climate change, even,
I agree. I love that we're on the same page.
And thank you for having me. Thank you for inviting me to take part in this important conversation around perimenopause. It's really, it's a time in my life that is deep in my heart. So thank you.
Well, we're all in it together. Woo!
Yes.
Here are my key takeaways from this conversation with Jessica Childs. If something is coming up for you emotionally or physically and it feels really weird, make sure that if your doctor doesn't bring up your age and this part of your life or perimenopause, if you have or have had ovaries, it's a good idea just to ask if this could be a part of it. Number 2, masturbation is a great way to bring pleasure into uncomfortable experiences, like insomnia. Why not try to infuse a little pleasure the next time you're staring at the wall at 3 a.m.? Number 3, when we become aware of a boundary, it allows us to be choiceful about how we respond when that boundary is broached. And we can come up with several responses that allow us to engage authentically and honestly while still respecting the very real needs that we have. Number 4, this week, I'm going to make a little more room to rehearse a little less and to show up in full, vulnerable presence in social interactions. Let me know what resonates with you from this conversation with Jessica Childs. If you have comments or questions, shoot us a DM on Instagram at The Lovely Unbecoming, and we'll do our best to respond to them on Instagram or in an upcoming episode of the Pause to Go podcast. Thank you so much for listening to the Pause to Go podcast. If you got something out of this episode, let us know. Share it with a friend, join our Facebook group, and subscribe, rate, and review on Apple Podcasts if you loved it. If not, no worries. We want you to tell it like it is, and we'd love to have your input. If you want to know more about what I'm up to, you can follow me on Instagram at The Lovely Unbecoming or at my website, thelovelyunbecoming.com. Stay curious, y'all.